The moment Dante Moretti stepped into the garden wedding, the world felt off balance. He was a man who controlled empires of fear, and yet, one laugh, one glance from a woman he didn't know, made him feel powerless. Welcome back, my beautiful family and friends. If you're hooked in and you're ready to enjoy this story, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one, and you don't want to miss it. Now, let us begin. The lantern swayed gently in the evening breeze, casting golden patterns over the cobblestone courtyard. It was the kind of night that made weddings feel like something out of a dream, romantic, fragile, fleeting. Dante Moretti stood at the edge of it all, hands tucked into his pockets, his black suit impeccable, but his posture rigid, almost unnatural. He had promised his friend Luca he would attend without incident. Yet every fiber of his being resisted the cheerful chaos around him. Music floated from a string quartet tucked beneath a wooden pergola, the notes lilting, soft, teasing. Dante didn't care. He had never cared for weddings, birthdays, or any event designed to display happiness. These were gatherings of vulnerability, and in his line of work, vulnerability was dangerous. Yet, as he watched the guests mill about, laughing and toasting, he caught a glimpse of her. She moved among the crowd like sunlight made flesh, her dark skin glowing beneath the lantern light, her laughter ringing clear and warm. Ayanna Carter. He didn't know her name yet. He didn't need to, but she was impossible to ignore. Ayanna adjusted the folds of her deep emerald dress and bent over slightly to steady a tray of champagne glasses for the bridesmaids. She smiled at something someone said, and it was effortless, natural. She radiated life, and in a world where Dante was surrounded by masks, lies, and unspoken threats, that light was dangerous. He turned his gaze away, forcing himself not to watch. He could not afford distraction, not now, not ever. Yet something in the curve of her smile, the tilt of her head, refused to let him. He had never met anyone like her, not in Brooklyn, not in the boardrooms, not in the shadowed alleyways where loyalty and fear ruled. Luca's voice broke through the din. Dante, come on. You promised. He nudged his friend lightly, already aware of the way Dante's eyes lingered on the woman in question. Dante only nodded, giving a subtle, curt acknowledgement. He did not need to explain. Luca knew him too well. Ayanna moved closer to the bride, laughing at a whispered joke, entirely unaware of the intensity of the man watching her from across the courtyard. She didn't know that a man who commanded an empire of shadows had paused mid-breath just to see her laugh. She didn't know that her warmth had already carved a place in a heart that had been taught to feel nothing. A waiter passed by with trays of hors d'oeuvres. Dante took a glass of champagne automatically, hands steady despite the sudden awareness of her nearness. And then the moment happened. One small collision, an accident, a misstep. Ayanna's elbow caught his chest as she turned too quickly, and a glass of champagne tipped precariously. Watch it. Dante's voice was low, controlled, not angered, but something in his tone demanded attention. I'm so sorry. Ayanna's voice was bright, apologetic, tinged with embarrassment. She grabbed napkins and tried to steady the spilling liquid. I wasn't paying attention. Honestly, I have no idea how I... Dante held up a hand. It's fine. His eyes met hers, dark and unreadable. And then something unexpected happened. She smiled. Not a nervous, apologetic smile, but one that dared him to be a little less composed. Fine. Really? You're going to act like nothing happened after nearly drowning me in champagne? She teased, her tone sharp but playful. Dante raised an eyebrow, caught off guard. Few spoke to him like that, and fewer still did it without fear. It's fine, he repeated, though now the words felt inadequate. She laughed, the sound of melody that made the air feel warmer. You're serious? You're really serious? She asked, shaking her head, still smiling. You're like stiff and scary, and yet here you are, taking it like a saint. I have learned to endure, Dante said, his voice dry, though the corner of his mouth twitched in a way he barely recognized. Accidents happen. Her eyes sparkled with amusement. Endure, huh? That sounds dangerous. For you. Perhaps, he admitted, and something in his chest twisted. He didn't know why he felt a sudden desire to hear her laugh again. He didn't know why he wanted to see her unafraid of him. Because in his world, fear was respect. Fear kept people alive. But she was alive, radiant and fearless. And he realized with a jolt that he couldn't look away. Luca cleared his throat behind him. You're going to stand there all night staring? Or are you going to behave like a guest? Dante's jaw tightened. I am behaving, he said quietly, then turned back toward the crowd, but not before catching her glance. She looked at him with curiosity, amusement, and something he couldn't name. And the collision, the accidental, trivial collision of champagne, had set something irreversible into motion. Ayana, meanwhile, was adjusting the last of the glasses when she noticed him watching again. Her heart skipped, not because she feared him, but because something about the intensity of his gaze unsettled her in a way that was oddly thrilling. She had met confident men before, but confidence that didn't shrink from a challenge or hide behind charm. It was rare, and Dante Moretti exuded it. In every muscle, every posture, every unreadable expression. She shook her head and whispered to herself, "Great. Trouble in a suit." The reception continued around them, with the orchestra playing soft melodies and guests sipping champagne, laughing and toasting. Dante moved with precision, each step measured, surveying the scene. Yet he kept one eye on her, drawn despite himself. For Dante, this was supposed to be a simple evening, a favor to a friend, a moment to stand in polite observation while his friends celebrated. He did not plan to feel anything resembling curiosity, fascination, or desire. And yet, the first time he saw her smile across the garden, he felt a jolt in his chest that he hadn't felt in years. Not since the nights spent walking through Brooklyn alleys, not since the days of whispered threats and stolen childhoods. A spark had ignited, and for once, he had no plan to extinguish it. Ayana moved through the crowd with effortless grace, unaware of the weight of the gaze following her. The careful calculations of a man who controlled empires, yet could not control the sudden pull she had on him. For a moment, Dante considered walking away, to avoid complication, to protect himself, to maintain the rigid walls he had built so carefully. But the thought of leaving without knowing her name, without speaking, without seeing more of her, was unbearable. He approached her, slow, deliberate, careful not to startle her. "May I?" he asked, motioning to the empty space beside her. She looked up, startled, and then measured him with an amused, wary expression. "May you what?" "Stand here," he said simply, without spilling anything else. Her laugh rang out, musical and bright, and she gestured for him to join her. "All right, but I warn you, I'm messy." Dante allowed himself a fraction of a smile, something he almost didn't recognize. "I can handle mess," he said quietly, and for once he meant it. As the evening deepened and the sky turned darker, filled with twinkling stars, Dante realized that the most dangerous thing in the garden was not the shadows of his past, not the legacy of the Moretti Syndicate. It was her, the one woman who had, with a single glance, a single laugh, begun to unravel him. The night deepened, and the wedding garden glowed under strings of lanterns, like a scene suspended between reality and dream. Dante found himself beside Ayana more often than he intended, and each step toward her felt less accidental and more like a decision he couldn't resist. He still reminded himself that he was a man with responsibilities that stretched far beyond this courtyard, that love was a weakness he could ill afford. But her laughter, her ease, her humanity, made that warning seem distant and hollow. Ayana, meanwhile, moved through the crowd with her usual grace, the emerald of her dress shimmering under the soft lights. She had noticed him from the beginning, the tall, serious man in black who stood apart from everyone else. Yet she hadn't expected to see him lingering near her side. There was an aura about him that demanded attention without needing words. And, while most people might feel intimidated, she felt curious, intrigued even. "So you don't dance?" she asked, tilting her head as the orchestra transitioned into a slow waltz. "I've seen enough stiff suits tonight, but you..." Your shoulders tell a different story. Dante glanced down at her, caught off guard by her perception. I do not, he admitted. Not in public. Her eyes sparkled, amused. I think you're lying, she said softly. Everyone has a rhythm they're hiding. You just have to find the right song. He hesitated. He was trained to conceal, to hide his vulnerabilities, but something in her presence stripped away the need for armor, if only for a moment. Slowly, he extended his hand. Then perhaps I'll risk it, he said. She laughed, placing her hand in his, and in that instant, the world contracted to the two of them. The music carried them across the stone courtyard, their movements imperfect but surprisingly synchronized. It was brief, fleeting, and entirely human, a stolen moment in a night meant for celebration. You're not like anyone I've met, she said as they paused at the edge of the dance floor. You're intense, scary maybe, but also honest. Her eyes searched his, looking for cracks in the armor he had spent years building. Dante's jaw tightened. I am careful, he said, choosing his words cautiously. I cannot afford to be anything else. But maybe for one night, she pressed, her voice softening. Maybe just this once, you can be, she trailed off, unable to finish the thought, leaving it suspended in the air. He looked at her, his mind a storm of warnings and desires. He was a man who dealt in control, who maintained power through fear and strategy. Yet here was a woman who asked nothing from him but presence. He wanted to give her that. He wanted to give her everything, even though every instinct screamed caution. The night stretched on, filled with whispered conversations, shared desserts, and stolen laughter. Dante learned her name, Ayanna Carter, and with it came an intimacy he had never expected to feel so quickly. He learned of her work with endangered species, her fascination with the rare devil's whole pupfish, and the gentle way she spoke of life, as if every creature deserved respect. And you? What about you? She asked casually, sipping a glass of wine. What do you do? Dante hesitated, the truth heavy on his tongue. Business, he said finally, knowing it was a safe answer. But Ayanna tilted her head, her eyes sharp. She could see the tension behind the word, the shadow lurking beneath the surface. Business? She echoed, voice curious. That's vague. Very vague. He met her gaze, deciding to give a fragment of honesty. I manage things. People, finances, operations. The kind of work most prefer not to think about. Her brow furrowed, interest peaked. Operations. Dante smiled faintly, a ghost of humor crossing his lips. Let's just say, I carry responsibilities some might find unpleasant. She nodded slowly, as if weighing his words. Sounds heavy. It is, he admitted, the confession slipping out more easily than he expected. And lonely. Her expression softened, and she reached out, touching his arm lightly. Then maybe you just need someone to remind you that it's okay to be human, just for a little while. Dante's chest tightened. Her touch was harmless, yet it sent a current through him he hadn't anticipated. He knew the danger of letting someone in, how easily hearts could be broken and lives could be threatened, but he also knew that standing here beside her he felt more alive than he had in years. Later, during the quiet lull between dances, Dante found himself walking with Ayanna along the perimeter of the courtyard, away from the crowd. The night air was cool, fragrant with jasmine and candlelight, and for a moment, neither spoke. They simply walked, the sound of their footsteps mingling with distant laughter. You seem different, Ayanna said after a pause. You don't just blend into the background like most people do. You command attention without trying. Dante's eyes softened, a rare vulnerability showing. It's a necessity, he said. In my world, invisibility is dangerous. Being noticed can save you or destroy you. She nodded, considering his words. And yet, you're here, standing in the light. You're visible, and you're laughing. A small, almost imperceptible smile tugged at his lips. Tonight, I am allowed to be, he said quietly. For a moment, they simply stood there, suspended between danger and warmth, between two worlds that shouldn't intersect. Dante realized with startling clarity that he wanted this night to last, wanted to linger in her presence without the shadows of his past encroaching. But fate is rarely content with stillness. Luca's voice came from the courtyard entrance. Dante, Ayana, come on, everyone's gathering for the toast. Reluctantly, Dante turned, feeling the weight of reality press in. The wedding, the people, the responsibilities that would inevitably pull him back into darkness. They were all waiting. Yet as he followed Ayana back to the crowd, he caught her hand briefly in his, holding it just a moment longer than necessary. The toast was heartfelt, filled with laughter, tears, and applause. Dante found himself watching Ayana's face, mesmerized by the ease with which she navigated the celebration. He had never seen someone so grounded, so fearless, so alive. During the final moments of the evening, when lanterns were dimmed and the orchestra played the last notes, Dante and Ayana found themselves alone near the garden's edge once more. The moment hung between them, fragile and potent. "I'm leaving tomorrow," Ayana said softly, breaking the silence. "Back to the lab, back to work. This has been beautiful, but it's just one night." Dante's chest ached. The thought of her leaving felt unbearable, yet he understood. "I know," he said quietly, "but perhaps one night can be enough to begin." She tilted her head, studying him. "Begin. To begin something real," he said, his voice low, sincere. "Something neither of us expected." Her smile returned, tentative but warm. "I don't know if I can step into your world, Dante, but maybe we can meet somewhere in the middle." He nodded, hope rising despite the shadows that clung to him. "Then we will." Somehow, as they stood there, under the faint glow of lantern light, the garden seemed smaller, the distance between their worlds narrower. For the first time in a long time, Dante felt that love, raw, unpredictable, human, was not a weakness, but a strength. And for Ayana, the man who had seemed untouchable and untamed was suddenly approachable, vulnerable, and real. Before the night ended, they shared a quiet moment, an unspoken promise hanging between them. Dante didn't know what the future held, the dangers, the secrets, the shadows, but for the first time in years, he felt something worth fighting for. Ayana laughed softly, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "You're different from anyone I've ever met. I'm glad tonight happened." He smiled, a genuine, unguarded expression that he rarely allowed himself. "So am I," he said simply. And with that, they returned to the courtyard, stepping back into the warmth and laughter of the wedding. Two people from different worlds who had found a fragile, fleeting bridge between them. A bridge they both hoped to cross again. Dante knew the road ahead would be complicated, filled with shadows and risk, but for the first time, he was willing to walk it. And Ayana, who had always lived a life of certainty and science, felt the spark of unpredictability that made life worth living. By the end of the night, it wasn't just the wedding that had changed. It was them. They had met, collided, and left a mark on each other's lives that neither would forget. And somewhere, in the quiet aftermath of music and laughter, Dante Moretti, the human, the boss, the man who had never allowed himself to feel, realized that perhaps love wasn't the weakness he had feared. Perhaps it was the most powerful thing he had ever encountered. And for Ayana Carter, the woman who had never sought romance, but had found it in a man she barely knew, the night was proof that sometimes the unexpected could be exactly what life demanded. As the garden emptied, Dante and Ayana walked toward the distant lights of New York City, side by side, knowing that this was only the beginning. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.